Hi guys, I'm Raz. I have the national deadlift record as a junior at 83 kilos. That's it. Just watch my Instagram videos, follow me. That's it. Alright. Do I start? Alright, I think we're starting. Alright. Hello everyone. Welcome to the Sumo Deadlift tutorial. The Sumo Deadlift is an interesting movement as it doesn't really replicate anything else you do in life. Like, if you're gonna go pick up a box, you're not gonna open up and pick up like this. Alright, so it's a very new concept to a lot of people, and it can be very challenging to learn to begin with, but that's why it's pretty hard to master. But I'd like to say I can give you the tips and techniques to master it today. Or to learn how to master it today. So why is a sumo deadlift pretty important? I'd like to say, if you look at most trends in terms of powerlifters in the lighter weight classes, they tend to favor towards a sumo deadlift, simply because of leverage. Sumo is pretty advantageous in leverage in terms of conventional. You're going to be here and finishing there. Meanwhile, sumo, you're ultimately reducing the range of motion. That's one of the competitive advantages. Number two, it's a bit less taxing in terms of the lower back and the hip. Because we aren't experiencing as much torque load through the lower back, or we aren't experiencing as much through, just the lower back in general, and the posterior chain, it's a lot more anterior dominant, so it can be really helpful for that reason too. Three is if you have really good leverages for it. So if you're going to open up your hips really wide and get your hips close to the bar, that's another really good advantageous reason for it. So let me deconstruct the components of a sumo deadlift and what it comprises of. Alright, and then I'll go through a few warm-up exercises that I like to do before sumo deadlifting as well. So, in a sumo deadlift, essentially, there is going to be a hip hinge component, right? So obviously our stance is going to be a lot wider than conventional. So conventional stance is here, sumo stance is going to be a bit wider through here, okay? So two things I'm really looking for a sumo deadlift is going to be the hip hinge component. So yes, meanwhile, whilst we aren't to a big degree of hip hinge compared to conventional, where we're going to be here, the hip hinge for a sumo is still existent. So it's going to be here, alright? So I'm going to get over here, hip hinge component, that's one thing I'm looking for. And then there's going to be that abduction external rotation component. So that's the wedging component. But we're going to open up our knees as much as we can, right? And get our hips close to the bar. But that's not to be confused with getting your hips close to the bar just by itself, right? So hips, knees out, abducted and externally rotated is a byproduct of getting hips close to the bar, okay? Or the other way around. Hips close to the bar is a byproduct of abducting and externally rotating, okay? So, again, hip hinge, abduct, external rotation. Third thing, push off the floor as hard as you can through loading through the quads, and then locking out. Can someone tell me what the easiest part of the sumo deadlift is? Lockout, right? So the lockout component is something that I don't really like to overtrain too often, because in my experience, most sumo deadlifts are missed off the floor. If you mess it up off the floor, chances are you're going to mess it up at lockout, okay? So let me show you what it looks like to begin with, and then we'll go through some exercises of how I like to get into position for it, okay? So here, arms nice and long, hip hinge. Alright, from here I'm going to abduct, externally rotate, hips through, lean back. Alright, now here are a few drills that I like to prime myself to get into a good sumo deadlift position. First one is just to prime abduction and external rotation. That's why I like to use a band for that practice. I like to put the bands around my knee, my ankle, sorry. Right, and I like to just hold this position statically, right, and really just try and open up the hips. The mobility that's required for this is developed over time, and that takes time to master. But just practicing how to do this, right, and slowly opening up is going to be really good. Okay, it's going to really teach you how to get your tibia stacked on top of your ankle joint, right? If a lot of misconceptions is a lot of people think, you know, they let the shins travel forward, which is not really efficient in a sumo deadlift at all. Okay, we really want to stay out as wide as you can. Right, we don't want to get over and roll over like so. That's going to be drill number 1. Drill number 2 is going to be priming the quads. So because it's a more anteriorly loaded movement, the quads are pretty important in terms of producing force off the floor. So one thing I like to do is, again, I grab the same band, same resistance. Oh, I need a rack. Oh, I need the rack for this. Okay. So second drill I like to do is, sorry? Shit. Maybe I could. Second drill is coming up through here. And again, it's also priming that abduction external rotation, but it's also going to be priming the quads. Right, so from this position, I really like to think about like snapping my knees together and locking out through the quads. Right, obviously you don't have to be as wide, but it's going to be locking out, opening up, and locking out. Right, I do that a few times, like 15, 20 times during my warm-up. Now, the other third drill that I really like to do is, with a deadlift in general, we don't want to shorten our arms whatsoever. Okay, so a lot of people, when they present being new to sumo deadlifting, they present that really flat back structure, which sort of looks like something like this. I think we've all seen it before. It's like here, and then they're going to be flat backing it like this. They really shorten their arms because they think, all right, I need to keep my back as tight as I can. So they're going to shorten their arms and really present that flat back structure, right? So it ends up looking something like this. If you're doing that, might as well just conventional deadlift, right? Or like, you know, you're pretty much not getting any of the benefits that you will receive from doing a sumo deadlift, which is that reduced range of motion. So third thing I like to do is to prime for protraction is, Dan, you mind grabbing me some 20 kilo dumbbells? So yeah, protracting is very important. Now, yeah, you've seen me do this. So in a sumo deadlift or deadlifting in general, we want to get some posterior expansion in the rib cage, right? This is very different to what a bench press is like, where you're trying to get that P to A expansion, posterior to anterior expansion, where you're trying to breathe up as much as you can, right, and get those ribs up as high as you can. For a sumo deadlift, it's the complete opposite. We essentially want to be in a protracted position, and you want to expand the air through that lower part of our back, right? So these are one of the drills that I like to do. Is I grab some really heavy dumbbells, or heavy-ish, 20 kilos is not that heavy. But essentially, I just like to hold this position and let my shoulder blades come forward and think about reaching my fingertips to the floor. Right? As a result of that, if you notice here, it's really going to open up my upper back, and it's going to allow me to breathe through the upper back. So here, right? It's very different to breathing up through here. Okay? So that's the most important, that's another important part to a sumo deadlift, the reaching component. So making your arms as long as we can. How are we going to differentiate reaching versus rounding? So rounding looks something like this, right? Meanwhile reaching looks something like this. They look very different from the side. Oh, they look very similar, but their components are very different. So one thing I like to look at is my sternum angle. So is a person's sternum angle facing the floor? Or is it neutral, and are they lengthening their arms? So in terms of like learning how to do that, I find that a low reach. So learning how to reach and protract while reaching in that lower degree is going to be more beneficial than trying to teach up. Okay? So yeah, look at the sternum angle. So a lot of people, when they see efficient sumo deadlifters deadlift, they're going to think, all right, I need to round through the upper back. But that also presents a different problem. They're going to be here, right? They're going to round, and then they have to undo all that rounding to lock out, right? And I'd argue that also is not very efficient at all, because ideally lockout should be the easiest part of the sumo deadlift. And by rounding, you're gonna create the worst of two worlds, where it's hard at the floor and hard at lockout. So that's why, right? So yeah, so an efficient sumo deadlift looks a bit something like, so here we're fully lengthening out our arms, right? I'm gonna protract as much as I can, let my shoulder blade wrap around forward, right? And I'm gonna grab the bar. My arms are really nice and relaxed here, so they're just hooks, right? And from here, I'm gonna pull the slack out by pushing through the floor. So I'm nice and relaxed, they're doing nothing. I'm gonna start loading my legs, my quads, and that's gonna be through that drill that we just did. And I'm gonna open up, wedge in, lean back. Okay, now that we can have an eye for the components of the sumo deadlift, let's go to actually performing or learning how to do it, or things that we should look out for in our own sumo deadlift. Now, one thing that I like to do, as just if you're starting to learn, is try to create a house with your shins, right? So if you're here and you're wedged in, notice how my legs aren't really creating a house right now. One, the walls of the house are a bit too slanted. So that means we're not stacked on top of each other, right? Meaning our ankle is no longer stacked on top of our knee joint. So that is way too far out, right? So meanwhile, some people have to go a bit closer if you have good mobility, if you have decent mobility. If you're like Bonner, you can go all the way out and maintain that stacked position. You know, I don't have that capacity to do that. Or most people don't have the capacity to do that. Would you agree? Cool. So yeah, looking for a house, or like seeing a house in someone's setup is going to be dependent on obviously the limb lengths. Like Rob's house would be a lot further than mine. Mine was probably around here. Rob's would probably be around here, and he'd still be able to maintain that same stacked house looking position. So that's how I like to think about what's happening at the legs. Cool, now let's go to the upper body. Next thing we want to think about is the reaching component. A lot of people don't know how to reach, to be honest. Like they just automatically shorten their arms. And in deadlifting in general, you just want to think about our arms as just as just ropes or like chains, right? They're pretty much flaccid. What you might see me do in my setup is just wiggle my arms around, right? And that's just as a way of just relaxing, teaching my arms how to relax, right? So like literally you see me do this, or you might see like someone like Jared, for example. He goes like this, like he just touched something hot. He's like and then he goes deadlifts, right? That's just a way of just one, relaxing through the hands, because at no point do you essentially want to row the bar or row the slack out, and that's going to be again pretty counterproductive for a deadlift. All right, cool. Is there any questions so far? Yep.
Then there would be rounding of that.
Yeah.
What if someone had really short arms and you made them rounding and holding rigidly? Would that be more beneficial to their short arms than at least now people and everyone else with longer arms?
Well, I mean, if it doesn't. So Brad basically asked if someone has really short arms, and if they were to round a bit more instead of protract, would that give them an advantage? Alright, okay, if that person really has short arms and rounding, they would eventually have to unround that to lock out, am I right?
Yeah.
I would say if they have short arms, they're already disadvantageous to deadlift, right? So they're pretty, I like to say they're sort of like semi-screwed in terms of deadlifting or learning how to deadlift. But that's perfectly fine. But eventually you will have to unround all of that rounding to lock out. Otherwise, you're going to be presented here, right? You're going to be here, and you're going to have to eventually learn how to unround all of that, right? And that just presents a lot of inefficiency up the floor as well. So yeah, while it could be okay if they have really short arms, but I think really learning how to protract and really teaching how to lengthen your arms as much as you can is going to be really beneficial. Oh, we're going to be here?
Maybe like a slight route, maybe. See if it helps. See if they don't try to lockout. Oh, like people try to lockout, then go that round, but if you try a little round and they start to push.
Then they have to unround? Did they learn how to protract first?
Yes, they learn how to protract. They have to try around. Like
If they
okay, don't worry about rounding. But if it ends up working,
I mean, if it doesn't present any inefficiencies, then I'd say, yeah, it's okay. Like, but again, I mean, the whole reason why you're doing sumo deadlift is to reduce range of motion and, you know, use your leverage to your advantage. So, yeah, it's a big trade-off. But again, it's individualized in that regard. Okay, now, let's talk about the slack. A lot of people get the slack wrong in the sumo deadlift, where they're really just picking up with their arms. Like, I can't stress this enough. I've seen a lot of people, they just think about rowing the bar to them or think the lats need to be on. But you gripping the bar and pushing the floor, a byproduct of that is your lats are already going to be on. So at no point, so if I start to load the legs, right, in an abducted, rotated position and my arms are nice and relaxed, if I start pushing the floor, your lats are already going to be turned on. Okay? I'm not even thinking about it and they're on. Okay? So that's where a lot of people that I see make a mistake in the sumo deadlift, where they're really thinking about, all right, cool, I need to try row the slack as much as I can, right? But they're not really loading their legs efficiently to get most of that weight in their hands. Another thing with slack is you may see a lot of sumo pullers opt for a hook grip. That's just because of the issues of, because your base of support is a lot wider, right? You essentially have a bit more instability, and because your arm is going to be inside of your legs, there may be an issue where you may open up. That's because you're literally just fighting up against you. But however, hook grip is not the end all be all, and I find that it presents more issues than anything for most people, because you have to worry about pain and all the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it does. Right? It's a trade-off you have to make, but yeah, let's say the skin on your thumbs is not like up to scratch, or like, you know, it just hurts too much. That's literally going to inhibit how much you can deadlift, how much you can express your strength with deadlifting, without straps, of course. So that's another trade-off that you have to make. Cool. Now, when I think of the slack in the sumo deadlift, I like to think about bringing my collarbone to the very back wall, right? So, yeah, it's pretty different to conventional, but I like to think I want to stay as long as I can. So here I'm going to rise up, really think about getting my collarbone to that back wall, and then I'm going to wedge. That wedge component is extremely important. So it looks something like this. So my arms are really nice and long. I'm going to think about getting my collarbone to that back ceiling, to that back wall, sorry. I'm going to open up, externally rotate. From there, I'm loading through the legs. My arms are nice and relaxed. Pushing to the floor, knees first, lock out, lean back. Cool. Is there any questions there in terms of the slack?
Explain the difference between static and
So static, if you have really good mobility in the sumo deadlift, and you can passively hold that position really, really well, right? Then you'll see the people who you can pretty much, like for example, Bona, she can really hold up this position extremely well without having to use any sort of force or wedging, right? So she can wedge into position really well, right? From here, she can just go here and start pushing off the floor, lock out, hips through. However, for myself, I need that little bit of oomph to get myself into position, right? That's why you might see a lot of sumo deadlifters opt in for a dynamic setup, where you're literally gonna open up just that extra bit as you come up, right? No, those are the main two differences. Yeah, also the dynamic slack pull, it can be a bit more, you can get a bit more loading off the floor, like that eccentric, like that fake eccentric that I talked about. So that fake eccentric effect you can get by just by doing the dynamic slack pull. Right? But if you have good mobility, static slack pull might be just for you. I don't think that's any of us boys. We have really cheap mobility to an extent, but we can still sumo a lot. I'm the proof of that. Cool. Now let's talk about the sequencing of the deadlift, of the sumo deadlift in particular. It's going to be knees, then hips. Right? Because we want to try to get our quads out of the way. Right? That's going to be one point of deficiency of knees first. Also, you want to hold as much contractile length in our glute as much as possible. Right? So if you already start shortening the knees, the glute too early, right? It's like, okay, all right, for example, I'll show you what that looks like. Here my glutes are shortened, and it's like, all right, where else do I have to go? Right? So you're going to essentially have to extend through the lower back and get that effect. Right? But if you get your quads out early, knees out early, my glute is still in a relatively, my hips are in a relatively hip flex position so that they can contract, and I just have to lean back. And that's it. Does anyone agree with that? Or disagree?
I've always thought of the battle between like, is there too much of that? Like, what if you do that off the floor?
If you do that off the floor?
Yeah, like at one point, like too much. I agree with getting the knees out of the way, especially if you're like a straight bar pass. Where does it get too much where it's like, okay, that was a bit much. Like, it's just like a strip. Would that be too much, or would that be ideal?
I don't think it will ever become a stripper deadlift because it's not like conventional where your torso is like facing the floor. Sumo, you're a lot more upright. So I don't think it'll ever come to that point in terms of stripper deadlifting it. Unless your torso angle is really, really far flat. And if you're a close stand sumo, then yeah, just go, you might as well conventional if that were the case, right? But yeah, knees, then hips. That's going to create the most efficient lockout as possible, right? I mean, there are going to be people who can lock out both at the same time with no relative problems. But in terms of efficiency, like maintaining that position off the floor for as long as you can, quads, hips, lean back, right? Meanwhile, if you do it at the same time, you will get stuck out. There may be a chance where you get stuck at lockout, which is why we really, really want to try dual knees first. Especially when it's extremely, sumo is pretty much make or break off the floor, right? It's very hard to grind out a misgrooved sumo deadlift at a higher intensity. So it's either you get it off the floor or you don't, to be honest. Right, which is why it is a blessing and a curse, because if you get it off the floor and you can hold technique really well, then again, this part is really easy. But if you don't get it off the floor properly or you're having issues off the floor, you're in for a bad time, unfortunately. Is there anything else you want to clarify?
What about your core hips? Yeah, or would it be hips?
Oh, so Brad's asking about knees and hips for conventional. I think the same premise goes. If you can use as much anterior off the floor, right, so that you can still have posterior musculature in a lengthened position for as long as possible, right, that's going to only allow you, so if you push off the floor and maintain that torso angle for as long as you can, and then lock out at the knees, look how much length my glute still has, right? So my glute is still in a lengthened position, that way I don't have to use my erectors to come up, right? Even though, yes, your erectors are working in a deadlift, they shouldn't be the primary movers in terms of what's happening in a conventional deadlift. Yeah, 100%. I mean, they're just there so that, you know, you don't fall flat on your face, I guess, right? But it's isometrically working. You're not actually actively trying to extend through there. It's going through isometric extension. Like, it's just holding that moment. Does that make sense? So yeah, I think that's why the knees before hips debate, it's because of that. One is so that the bar doesn't get caught on you, right? And that the bar path is really efficient, keeping it as close as you can to your body. And 2 is going to be, yes, we're keeping our glute and hips in a lengthened position and in a hinge position for as long as possible, and maintaining as much position off the floor before you have to start relying on other musculature. So if we can push off the floor as high as you can in either convi or sumo, and then get that hip hinge component happening, then they'll present less issues at lockout. Does that make sense? Cool. We talked about slack, we talked about positioning. So let's talk about toe angle. As you get wider in a sumo deadlift, you essentially have to toes out a lot more, right? So if you're here, realistically, it's going to be hard to abduct and externally rotate from this position. So as a result of that, we have to compensate with a toe angle, right? However, as we get wider, you may present issues of like being unstable at the top. So as we get here, obviously your toe angle is going to be all the way up there, right? As proportion for that. But as you lift, you may find that we are very unstable because our foot is so externally rotated. Like try to stand tall in this position, like it doesn't feel extremely stable, right? So yeah, so that's a trade-off that you also have to think about as well. But that's also codependent on your lever lengths and your anthropometry and all the rest of it. Cool. Is there anything else that I need to talk about? The wedging component? Yeah? The wedging component is also pretty important. A lot of technical things in a sumo deadlift. So yeah, I think the wedging component is the most important part. We do want to get our hips close to the bar, but the hips close to the bar is a byproduct of getting your knees out and open, right? So a lot of people, they think, all right, hips close to the bar, sweet. We're going to do this, and we're going to sumo deadlift like that, right? And again, that's not very efficient because one, the bar is already knocked forward. You're no longer building that house position, and then that's going to present issues at lockout. That already looks fugly, to be honest. Does everyone agree? Yeah. Looks good. Is there any questions?
Yeah, so like when I wedge, I find that I'm rushing. And then when I'm in static, and I just like those quads. So it's good to, and then in order to feel my adductors, I find that I have to like
I thought, okay, yeah, no, that's a good point. So, Mona's asking, like, she has a posterior pelvic tilt to feel her adductors in the sumo deadlift. I personally don't feel my adductors that much in the sumo deadlift. Do you feel it, Michael?
Last year, my deadlift,
Yeah.
Last year, my deadlift, I was pretty much extending my glutes at the bottom.
Yeah.
Pop off the floor.
Yeah.
When I was deadlifting like that, I think.
A lot of adductors? Yeah.
But now when I fix that, I don't feel.
Yeah, so I personally don't feel my adductors. I know some people who do. But in terms of posteriorly tilting, I also posteriorly tilt in the deadlift, but I don't think about my glute. So I'm not thinking about butt squeezing to get my hips neutral or like tilted like this way. Right? What I'm thinking about is I'm trying to reach my rib cage as far back as possible and protracting as much as I can. And as a result of that, I'm going to get into the same looking position, but my glutes are still like not on. They're like still lengthened, they're not contracted. So what it looks like is, again, we're going to try to breathe in through our upper back. So we want that anterior to posterior expansion. Fancy term is dorsal rostral expansion, right? So we're going to try to get in as much air through the upper back, but again, we want to protract. I'm going to shift my rib cage as far back as possible, right? And from here, my glutes aren't on, but it's the same byproduct. Instead of doing this to get my hips under, right? I'm thinking of doing this and reaching back as far as I can. Right? Looks the same, but I promise my glutes aren't on here. Does that make sense?
Yes, I was thinking more thoracic rather than
Lumbar. Yeah. So yeah, your lumbar, essentially, I don't feel my lumbar when I deadlift. When I sumo deadlift in particular. And nothing is really happening at the lumbar. My lumbar is pretty neutral. But your lumbar does have curves. So keep that in mind. Like it is curved to an extent. So factor that in as well. It's not perfectly flat. Yeah, so the wedging component, if you use a dynamic side pull, you're going to be here, right? I'm going to start opening up my knees, right, as much as I passively can. I'm going to bend down and grab the bar in a protracted position. And from here, I'm going to rise up. I'm going to start loading anteriorly through the legs and start pushing the floor here. Again, collarbone to the wall. From this position, right, I'm already abducting and externally rotating. As I bring my knees out even further, my hips will come closer to the bar, right? So, start loading the legs. Good. From here, opening up, even more, knees, hips. Okay, let me try that again. Loading through the anterior part of my leg, abducting, externally rotating, open up, hips through. Does that make sense? Cool. Any questions? Is there any issues that you guys experience, particularly in your sumo deadlifts, that I could try troubleshoot before you go into a semi-practical side?
My deadlift, well, basically, if it's someone with a semi-close stance, then sumo, lift more than they can. I can't get very wide. Whenever I go wide, I can't get my hand. I get out, or not be able to reach the bar. Like, I'm going if I go that last bit. The only way I can maybe keep it out basically close stance sumo, would I be able to out deadlift my conventional style?
I definitely think so. Yeah, I think so too. I think you can, but I think I want to have a look at your the way your feet go and what you're thinking about to begin with.
Usually, at least the past week or two, there's been a lot of abduction. I was thinking a lot of external rotation. That's what it's nothing for me. I got huge abduction. It's almost like pushing out towards the plates.
Yeah.
And help float. Like, hold that somewhat closer.
Okay. Yeah. Abduction is not a bad cue. I like to think about, when I'm thinking about where I'm driving my force towards, I think about driving towards my toes a lot more, and I'm thinking about pushing through my quads as hard as I can. But how much passive abduction do you have? No what? I'd argue I wouldn't have as much abduction as well. But I think it's just something you just have to practice over time. You have to really spend time with it. Because not too long ago I was deadlifting close stance as well, actually. In 2020, my stance was here. Alright? And that was with a deadlift bar, I could just yank it as hard as I could. Alright? But then I've learned how to abduct more, externally rotate more. I think that's a position you have to develop over time. Huh? Oh, 100%. I think there's hope. I mean, I was watching your deadlift the other day. And I think that looks better than how I've ever seen you deadlift in the past. So it's getting somewhere. Cool.
Okay, so I have small feet.
Yeah.
Like smaller femurs as
Yeah.
the way I stand, and I find that I mean, it's probably just something that I think about having weight on my toes, but I definitely like invert my ankles and my feet
Like this way?
easily. So like the pressure like on the outside of my foot, at the top of my lip. I don't know if that's small feet,
I think that's with has something to do with your toe angle. So because you are wide and your toe angle is extremely wide as well, right? Like I think you're thinking really about opening up. So as a result of that, and you have good passive mobility too. Just keep that in mind. Like I think that as a result of that, you're really going to think about being on the outside of your foot like this. Am I right? looks something like this. Obviously, like really good position as well. Maybe bring your toe angle in, right? May help with that. Again, I think that's something you have to experiment with, but I think the concepts stay the same. One thing that I really think about, especially for a dynamic slack pull, is I think about pressuring it through my heels actually, to begin with, because as I wedge in, it's going to place me on the midfoot. Right? Does that make sense? So let me show you. So I'm going to set up. Alright, abduct, externally rotate. Cool. Oh, bit too much. Alright, so here I'm thinking about like staying a bit more on my heels, so I can sort of counterbalance myself as I come down to the bar. And because I'm going to essentially like drive my hips, I'm going to abduct and externally rotate at the hip. My hips are going to be pulled forward as a result of that. Right, so as I land, I'm going to be on the midfoot, and from there I'm going to be balanced, then I'm going to push the floor. Right? Compared to being on the midfoot, or starting on the midfoot, so right now, I'm on my midfoot, pretty balanced here. If I'm going to think about doing this, then I'm going to abduct and externally rotate, I'm going to be pulled forward. Right, onto my toes. Just because there's a lot of forces going this way, this way, this way, that way. Right? So I like to think about, right, I need to posteriorly shift my center of mass a tiny bit more backwards before it goes onto the midfoot as I come and start pushing off the floor. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that? Yeah, I changed it recently. Yeah. My heels in.
Like, what goes to your head? The center of mass.
Yeah. Heels. So Michael's asking like, what am I thinking of to modify my center of mass? Yeah, heels and ribs back. So that's automatically gonna like posteriorly shift my load backwards. Right? I like having my hands out in front as I set up because that just helps me stay balanced. So I like to stay here. Right? Because obviously hands are out in front. You know, that's some weight being balancing me as I come down. And then from here I'm just gonna open up through my midfoot, lockout. Does that make sense? Cool. Any troubleshooting questions or anything else?
Where do you place the bar?
Where do I place the bar? Good question. A lot of people they think that they need to start with their shins on the bar, and that's actually not entirely true, but it can be true. If you have really good passive mobility, then yeah, you can start pretty much here, and then you can just start pulling. Right? Obviously, your shins will be a bit more behind the bar, but from there, like you can make contact, and from there you just start pushing the floor. However, for the likes of people who do a more dynamic slack pull, they would have to start just a tiny bit further away, because whilst we don't like to admit, we are sort of still driving our shins forward to some sort of degree, like not entirely forward like this way, right? But yeah, as we come up, our hips, our knees will have to sort of travel forward slightly, right? But you got to make sure that as you place it in the correct position. As you wedge, it's going to be in contact. So don't start too close. Give yourself a bit of space. That way you can actually have space to wedge. This is why a lot of people get mixed up. Otherwise, it will look like this. All right, let's say I'm here, arms long, push back, forward, immediately forward. Right, which is I think a problem you're experiencing. Where I think you start a bit too close to the bar.
I think for me, it's sort of being different each week because I'm playing with my hands with.
Yep.
So as I was wider, I was closer to the bar because I turned my foot out a bit more in my midfoot. It wasn't no longer here. I'm a bit more closer here. A bit closer. The more conventional style, like yeah, more on and off my live. Play with it each week. Try and get the perfect point. Yeah, I'm essentially just trying to find my midfoot. I'm trying to get a bit basic, just find my midfoot. Find my midfoot.
I think your shins come forward as a result of you thinking about being on the midfoot. I think you'd benefit quite a bit if you were to shift back posteriorly a tiny bit more. then get onto your midfoot.
I know that my original thoughts prior weeks were, well, hips to bar, hips to bar, hips to bar. Last week it was abduction. As close as they get, abduction things.
Yeah.
So I think it worked a lot better. Before when it was hip forward, it was very much like posterior tilt, things forward like that.
100%.
It feels good on my long spine with stacks. It was not good doing this, but it improved a bit better deadlift once. Obviously better.
Yeah, that looks a lot more efficient. That was the case. Yeah, I think hips close to the bar is a byproduct of, again, the knees. What's happening at the knees, all right?
The closest stance I go, I have somewhat long shins. So I might want to go over the bar.
Okay, yeah, Rob has really long shins too, and to a degree, yeah, the bar at the top end. So this part, only a tiny bit of the bar, will be a tiny bit over the shin. But for most part, as he gets over his knee, it's pretty much behind the bar already. That's just because of his long people. I think he suffered from long people problems, which is yeah. But I think solving that was going wider and actually giving himself some space to wedge. Because before Rob used to be here and close, and to angle not as wide. So as a result of it, yeah, no shit. His shins have no room to go except forward. You know. But now they're a bit more wider. Our shins are a bit more behind the bar. It's going to be a bit more, you're going to have a better time in terms of getting out, open. Cool. Any other questions? Alright, do you want to get into the practical side? Alright, Brad, you're up. Alright, let's start practicing some of the exercise drills that we've been showing. I don't think you need shoes.
Shoes good? Oh, no shoes.
I think no shoes is fine.
I'll quickly I think something fell down.
Oh no.
I thought he's got a big Audi. When you went to do a lockout, it was like a lockdown. I was like, you got a big Audi.
Do you know when you're like pushing?
Yeah.
You're on your midfoot already, but you're still putting as much on the heels.
You don't have much hip.
To be fair, I'm pretty flat-footed to begin with.
Most powerlifters should.
Yeah.
But like, I've seen like, I guess people who are wider. I don't know if you follow cheater lifter on Instagram.
No.
Singapore 370.
Okay, I think I might know.
Oh, you're tall.
Already pushing.
I mean, I don't think.
His neck is very rising one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do sort of have to pronate to start pushing off the floor, right?
That's the part of like, not even like the.
I assume if he can pull 310 at 17, he has some crack. He has some crack leverages, so he's the exception. All right, you ready, Brad? All right, let's try to adopt a wider stance today.
Slightly wider.
Slightly wider than what you're normally used to. Yeah.
I normally go about here, so that's what it's for. So maybe like shit. More of that.
So yeah, so here your triangle looks like it's predisposed to collapse. So bring your foot in a bit wide, closer. Right, now rotate your toes a tiny bit more out. Right, now try to feel out that deep hinge position here. So hinge and then try to open up. That as much as you can open up.
That hurts. Yeah, it's like contract.
As much as you can do.
Yeah, that hurt.
Okay, try to do the drills that we've been trying to do.
I used to wear.
Raz, would you recommend static stretching?
Static stretching
Yeah, on the reg.
for sumo deads on the reg. No.
I used to wear something else, sort of like.
Just keep in mind, I don't stretch at all, and I'm sweet. I think if you want mobility, in my opinion, weight moves weight. Oh, you have to double it over.
Yeah, it's very. It's like a bit stiff at this point. That's why I was like.
Where did the green one go?
I have Instagram, but I don't really.
Okay.
I guess it'll work.
Okay. Now push out as much as you can. So yeah, again, to answer your question, Bonner,
Yes.
weight moves weight. So as much as you can passively static stretch with no weight, I think through your accessories, you definitely develop the mobility for it. Okay, now hold that position just at the bottom. Whilst you're abducted and X-ray rotated, try thinking about driving that right knee out a bit more. Good. You got more? Well, I think mobility is something you just have to work on.
That's static stretching. That's training static stretching.
I mean, PNF, static, ballistic, I'll take whatever.
I mean, this is mobility work within itself. Weight moves weight. So if weight puts you in a certain position, you need weight to get you out of the position. Yeah. Okay, go 2 more. Nice. Good, let's go. Good. Last one. Hey, that looks like a decent position. Alright, cool. Now let's try to translate that onto the bar. Let's do a second drill of reaching as much as you can. So grab the dumbbells. Think about translating that rib cage as posteriorly as possible. So let that shoulder round forward. Think about breathing through the upper back. You're very chest breathy right now. Good. Breathe up through here. Think about breathing through the upper back. Let the weight pull you forward. Yeah? So relax the arms, relax the grip. Hey, this isn't too bad. Alright, hold that position for like 5 breaths. Think about, as you breathe in, you're going to try to expand through that back of the rib cage. Good. Hey, you actually get pretty good posterior expansion. Not bad. Good work. Alright, cool. Now let's try it out. Alright, let's toss it up. So triangle a bit more wide. It doesn't help that you're on the smooth part of the platform at all. Alright. Cool. Now start with the barbell a bit further out away from you. So that allows you to gives you space to wedge here. Now think about posteriorly translating that ribcage backwards. Good. Now arms as long as you can. Good. Can you reach more than that? Think about trying to reach Bonner. Good. Now get into your hip hinge position. Good. Now drive your shins out. You can drive more out. Good. Now bend down, grab the bar. Good. So this is an example where you would benefit quite a bit from the dynamic sack pull. So here, think about loading through the quads, right? Think about collarbone to the wall, and then as you come in, you're gonna push off the floor. Yeah, good. So even if you passively can't get into position properly, right? Use the wedge as a way to force yourself in position, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's never gonna be comfortable, right? You just have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Like it's gonna feel like shit. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to feel amazing unless you have passive mobility. But that's why the dynamic can be really beneficial in that regard, because it will wedge you and abduct you in a better position. You're using the weight to literally like counterbalance yourself and open up a lot harder. One more? Yeah, try that again. Do some reps. Good, posteriorly translate the rib cage. Relax the lats, relax the lats, relax the lats. Good. Right, start pushing through the quads here. Now open up. Hey, good, good. Keep that head up a bit. Good. Again. Keep your head up. So here, you're completely rounding. Yep. And that's just based off your sternum angle. So there, chin was down. Body follows wherever the head goes. So you want to keep that head nice and neutral. So neutral is not looking up, it's sort of looking towards that floor, like looking at the horizon. Yeah, that way. Okay? Go. Expand to the back of the rib cage again. Good. Now stand the heels, open up, good. Push through. Good. Again. Open up harder. Yeah, there we go. Nice. Does that make sense? You literally did it. Where? Yeah, well, I mean, you aren't properly warm, and you went from a maximally extended position for bench today. So yeah, you do need to practice getting a bit more flexed. But I've seen you do it and you're capable. But yeah, looking straight ahead will also fix your sternum angle, right? So you won't be rounding on top of yourself. So neutral is a good place to start. And there, try to get as much passive position in the bottom, passive abduction in the bottom position, right? If that's all you can do, that's all you can do, right? Bend down, grab the bar, and then from there, open up harder. Use that wedge to really open up, right? To really force yourself into position. And as a byproduct of that, the bar should already be breaking the floor. That's because we're leveraging how many 90 something kilos you weigh behind the bar, right? On top of the tension that you're generating off the quads to float the bar off the floor. That's why the pause deadlifts are really good for that regard, of just teaching, all right, how much can you passively abduct, keep tension off the floor, and then go, lockout. Without having to use your glutes so early. Ideally, you want to use your glutes as late as you can. It's a big muscle group, but again, if they're used to early in extension, they have to compensate one way or another. So if you're here, glutes are already shortened, that's where you get that issue at lockout. That make sense? Cool.
We got sumo on Friday. See how it goes.
Yeah, try it out.
Yeah.
Alright, is that it? Does anyone have any questions? Huh?
I can try Bonner for the passive abduction.
Okay, yeah, brother, show us how mobile you are.
I'll do passive.
Yeah, so Bono is an example of someone who can get into a lot of passive abduction. So notice how if she pushes her shins out even further, she can create that house position without even having to bend down and grab the bar. So yeah, because of your just passive nature and you have a lot of passive ability, it doesn't surprise me that the toe out angle here would cause you to be on the outside of your foot.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like if I stand normally and then externally rotate, I need to keep it.
Yeah, so you're there, you're already on the outside of your foot. And I think you're limiting yourself on how much you can push off the floor, because obviously the outside of your foot is a lot smaller than the inside of your foot. So essentially in all of our lifts, like deadlifting and squatting, we do want to pronate. So you do want to stay on the inside of our foot, get our foot as flat as possible, and start pushing through the floor. Now, whilst you do have really good passive mobility, have you tried bringing your stance in a tiny bit in?
Yeah. Like, I think lockdown, I was here.
Yeah.
And then,
Oh, yeah, sorry.
and I remember to like get down to the bar, instead of, I felt like I was doing a really wide,
Convi?
ventral, yeah, so I was like, because didn't matter how much external rotation I had, I still had like heaps of hip rise.
Okay, yeah. I think you may be struggling an issue from not being able to load your quads from that position. So try toe angle it in a bit more, right? And then give your space to actually wedge in. So whilst you do have really good mobility here, right? So bend down, grab the bar, right? And then actually, as you wedge in more, open up just a tiny bit more. But not passively enough to where you're shortening your glute. So think of it more that way. Okay. So yeah, I think this comes in an issue with people with passive mobility.
But I just feel really cramped. Does that make sense?
Well here, the reason why you're hip rising is because as you got closer to the bar, or your hips got closer to the bar, I can see your glute shortening.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I can feel it.
yeah, obviously
I feel like I'm actively
extending. Yeah, also you're externally rotating, so you're externally rotating and extending your hip.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of this and this action going on,
Yeah.
right? Rather than this, nice and neutral, into this. So that's why you were struggling or hip rising off the floor, because you break it off the floor, right? Glutes are already shortened,
Yeah.
so where else do you have to go? Except extend to the lumbar spine. So Hey, that's pretty cool. Nice. But yeah, if the other case for you, yeah, maybe bringing your stance in a tiny bit and actually using proper wedging mechanics instead of just relying excessively on the mobility can allow you to keep your butt not contracted at the bottom position. Yeah, that might be pretty good. Food for thought. But you also have a pretty good strong deadlift as it is, so I'll let coach decide
Wait,
of how that
like,
goes.
bring it in. We're doing conventional.
Bring it in. No, you definitely are a sumo puller. Any questions? Rob, you have anything to add? Dan, you have anything to add? Adductor pain?
Yeah, chronic. After I did sumo.
When you were doing sumo?
Yeah.
I think that was a result of hips getting close to the bar.
Oh yeah.
Because so from what I remember, your sumo deadlift, as soon as you started pushing off the floor,
The hip rise as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's because you were trying to glute contract to get hip close to the bar,
Yeah.
right? And I could visually see, I still remember this at States, your shin, as soon as you started pushing off the floor, everything started collapsing here, right? Because you wanted to, your body wanted to pronate, but you wanted to be like, all right, I want to be externally, on the outside of my foot. And as a result of that, yeah, your adductor is going to work through that. So I think, from what I remember, bringing your stance in just a tiny bit for when you were sumoing, just a tiny bit, and not thinking too much about hips close to the bar, and just letting the abduction and then the wedge take part in terms of building that house, probably would have benefited you at a time, from what I remember.
Yeah, I remember trying to like get it in, and then
Yeah.
yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, I remember queuing. His second rep was always better than his first if he felt a lot of tension. As soon as he felt tension between reps, his second rep was like perfect. I was like, how it feels second rep? Well, yeah, let's go like pain, let's improvise. You know, I always feel more tension. Tension and keep the butt towards the line.
Oh, like your second rep feels good.
Try and get that butt towards the tension. How it feels. Maybe not.
Yeah, but again, the butt tuck is really counterproductive in terms of the sumo deadlift. Like even for squatting in general, we don't want to maintain stack by squeezing in our butt because you're automatically contracting your butt. So if it's going to lengthen, where's it going to go? Yeah. So yeah, the tilty, the posterior tilty looking thing is a byproduct of shifting your rib cage as far backwards as you can and protracting, right? But yes, your spine to a degree is curved, so it's okay for a bit of a extension to happen at the lower back. Like it's fine. Using your butt at the bottom of a sumo deadlift is really counterproductive. Or trying to get a neutral spine or neutral by doing this, right, is not really helping you off the floor either, or a lockout. So that's what I remember. It's crazy how I still remember that from a year ago.
Figure it out.
Oh yeah. What about it?
Why you make it long?
Because I'm not blessed with really short. Because I'm not really blessed with long thumbs, unlike you. I have to get leverage. I have to get the leverage somewhere. So that's why. That's why.
Did you learn?
Did you guys learn something? So yeah, don't squeeze your butts to get under.
What if you have a naturally posteriorly tilted pelvis?
Get you anteriorly tilted or get you neutral. Well no, let's get you, can the person express a neutral position of this? If they're naturally like, did you say posteriorly tilted? Like this? Alright, can they, okay, well, then they probably need to learn how to express neutrality. I think sumo deadlift is not the way to fix that. There's probably better ways. If that were the case. Yeah, RP 8.5 single every week to fix it. It's probably a better means of trying to fix it. And sumo deadlift is probably not a great place to start.
They're almost wedge. I do this squat sometimes. Like this. It's not normally just like, oh yeah, that's neutral, yeah? Obviously not. I'll grab my leg, almost push myself. slowly how you might go to the bottom. Start down with myself, put my back into a normal position. So I'm not stuck up.
Yeah. I mean, okay, but
I was just hand. That is the thing.
you just need to get into a heavier weight class. See, if you have a gut, everything will be a bit more anterior. So as a result, you have to posterior, and there you go.
Everything's set in point to 105. Everything. Relationship go better, get promotion or whatever.
Yeah, everything just gets better when you get heavier. 100%. Except your nah.
Your arteries.
Come on. At least you still have. If you're 105s, I hope your missus will still. Yeah, one will still love you. Is that it? Alright, thank you guys for spectating. Glad I could teach you something.
Down floor 200.
Yeah, 250 this week.
Yeah. Then butt squeeze at the bottom.
I'm gonna get up.
I got done now?
Yeah, knees and hips.
Yeah.
I'm being serious. I actually do that.
And then just like, alright, so what we're going to do is this and this and just practice.
Just like all your ankles.
So yeah, in your case, don't rely too much on your mobility. Use proper wedging. In your case, get more mobility and use proper wedging. Rob, we're getting there. So, I can't really commentate, bro. This guy's sumo deadlift's cracked. It's better than mine. Yeah, push harder. Just push harder.
I don't even tell my story. I was like, I just need to try harder.
Push harder.
Yeah, push harder.
If you push harder, everything will be fine.
I think you just reminded me. Heel to mid. Heel to mid. Heel to mid.
Heels to midfoot. Yeah. Otherwise, me too. I'm sumo deadlifting tonight, and I'm probably gonna get thrown off so hard.
I do that. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm gonna slack by pushing it. Slack pull, shin angle, back and forwards.
I like to think, as I slack pull, I'm already passively. I'm trying to max out as much passive abduction as I can. But that works for me. So yeah, I'm already thinking about opening up as much as I can. And then as I wedge in more, I'm gonna abduct even more. Just to get that bit of a.
Because sometimes for me, back, I don't know if you remember like last year,
Yeah.
when I slack and I wedge it, the weight comes up and then my knees goes out. So it's like I can X-ray rotate even more once the list starts, but like technically proficient people, you're supposed to internally rotate as you push, right?
Yeah.
And that's why my pelvis will talk. But because thankfully I'm like, oh, I can just do that.
Being patient.
Yeah, I do.
This is a fuzzy thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have Rory right now. Alright, thank you everyone.